When Prince Harry sat down with Anderson Cooper, no one expected the conversation to turn this sharp. What began as a calm exchange quickly shifted into a tense back and forth, family wounds, tradition, and personal freedom all colliding on camera. This wasn't just an interview. It was a battle of pride and perspective, where every word felt heavier than the last. The lights in the studio were steady, the tone restrained, and Prince Harry sat across from Anderson Cooper in a posture of composure. On the surface, this was meant to be a thoughtful interview, an exploration of personal history, legacy, and identity. Yet, even in those opening minutes, it was clear something deeper was at play. What unfolded was not just a conversation, but a clash of narrative and perception. Anderson began in his usual manner, measured, deliberate, and neutral. His questions were framed as an inquiry, but they carried the weight of accountability. He was not simply interviewing a celebrity, he was questioning a man who had become a political figure in his own right. By choosing to leave the royal institution and speak out against it, Harry had stepped into a spotlight that went beyond family matters. He had entered a debate about power, influence, and the meaning of tradition in the modern age. Harry's responses, at first, appeared calm and calculated. He spoke of freedom, of breaking away from an institution he described as restrictive. His language was personal, but his framing was public. He positioned himself as someone unchained, as someone unwilling to be defined by centuries of royal protocol. But woven beneath his words was a thread of defiance, an insistence that he would not be bound by expectations, no matter how symbolic those expectations might be. Anderson, true to form, did not allow the tone to remain purely sympathetic. He pressed gently, but firmly, on contradictions. If Harry longed for privacy, why continue to share so much of his life on television and in print? If he sought to move forward, why circle back to grievances with the institution he left behind? These were not easy questions, and they cut through the calm atmosphere with surgical precision. Harry's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. His jaw tightened, his gaze sharpened. What began as polite conversation was already straining at the edges. The calm surface was cracking, revealing the tension beneath. This was not simply about a son of Diana telling his story. It was about a man locked in battle with a system that shaped him, a press that scrutinized him, and a public divided over whether he was brave or bitter. By the end of the opening exchange, it was evident that this interview would not be routine. It was moving towards something sharper, more confrontational. The calm had only been an opening act. The real story was just beginning. As the interview progressed, Anderson Cooper steered the discussion toward the monarchy itself, the institution that had defined Prince Harry's life since birth. This was no longer about individual experiences or family disputes. It was about a system, centuries old, built on tradition, symbolism, and a kind of soft power that still resonates across the world. Harry did not hesitate in his response. He described the monarchy not as a source of stability, but as a gilded cage. He spoke of ceremony as performance, duty as a burden, and the crown as something that dictated every aspect of his existence. To him, the institution was not a noble guardian of continuity but a structure designed to control, to silence, and to strip away individuality. Anderson listened carefully, but his follow-up carried the weight of public opinion. He noted that for many, particularly in Britain but also in America, the monarchy represented history, unity, and cultural identity. It was not merely about crowns and palaces. It was about shared heritage. Millions admired it, not because they believed in divine right, but because they valued its symbolism. Could Harry acknowledge that while he saw chains, others saw continuity? The tension grew sharper. Harry pushed back, framing the admiration of the monarchy as fairy tale infatuation, a romantic illusion disconnected from the realities of life inside. He cast himself as someone who had lived the story from the inside and emerged disillusioned. But his dismissal carried an edge of contempt, as though public affection for the crown was a misunderstanding that needed correcting. Anderson did not let this framing pass unchallenged. With quiet firmness, he asked whether Harry's narrative was selective. Was he critiquing the monarchy for its flaws, or was he rewriting it entirely to fit a personal grievance? Was this rebellion against an institution, or resentment against a family? The exchange mirrored something larger than just a celebrity interview. It sounded like a political hearing, where one side argued for reform and liberation while the other questioned motive, method, and consistency. Harry, the rebel voice, declared himself free of constraints. Anderson, the steady counterweight, reminded him that public accountability doesn't end simply because one declares independence. By this point, the polite tones of the early moments had faded. The conversation was no longer gentle reflection. It was a collision between tradition and rebellion, duty and freedom, perception and reality. Harry insisted that leaving was an act of survival. Anderson suggested it might also be an act of defiance. In that tension, the room felt heavier. The monarchy was not in the studio, but its shadow was present in every sentence, every counter-question. What had begun as a personal story had turned into something broader, a debate about the meaning of legacy in the modern world. As the interview deepened, the focus shifted from the monarchy as an institution to the family at the heart of it. This was not just about crowns and traditions anymore. It was about bloodlines, loyalty, and the legacy of one of the most recognized families on earth. And here, the conversation grew heavier, more personal, and undeniably more charged. Prince Harry spoke of his wife, Meghan, with intensity. She was, in his words, his partner in freedom, the one who helped him step outside the shadows of protocol and expectation. To Harry, Meghan represented not only love but liberation, a break from a life scripted by others. His defense of her was unwavering, almost combative, as he described how the pressures of the monarchy and the relentless scrutiny of the press had placed her in impossible situations. Anderson Cooper listened closely but raised the issue many had considered. Was Meghan's presence truly the spark of change, or had she become the lightning rod for tensions already brewing inside Harry? Was she the cause, or the catalyst? Harry pushed back firmly, insisting she was neither scapegoat nor excuse. She was simply the truth that forced him to act. Then came the most sensitive subject, his mother, Princess Diana. Anderson asked the question with care, but the weight of it was unavoidable. Did Harry see his own choices as a continuation of Diana's defiance against tradition? At this, Harry's tone sharpened. He bristled at the suggestion that Diana's memory could be used as a lens to analyze his decisions. While he admitted that her struggles shape his understanding of the monarchy's darker side, he rejected the idea that he was living her legacy by proxy. His anger, thinly veiled, suggested that the comparison struck too close to wounds that remain raw. The atmosphere in the studio shifted. This was no longer just a political or institutional critique. It was a portrait of a man deeply scarred by loss and embattled by loyalty. The monarchy was not only a structure he rebelled against, it was also the family he could not separate himself from. Every statement about duty and tradition carried the echo of personal pain. Every defense of Meghan carried the shadow of Diana. Anderson, steady as ever, pressed for clarity. Was Harry speaking as a private man defending his family, or as a public figure reshaping the narrative of royalty for the world to see? That question lingered in the air, unanswered in full, because perhaps the truth was both. By the end of this exchange, the interview had taken on the quality of a public reckoning. What began as reflection on family became a broader question about legacy, what it means to inherit history, and what it costs to break from it. By this stage, the interview had shifted from personal reflection to a sharper examination of accountability. Anderson Cooper, leaning into his reputation as a steady and disciplined interviewer, raised the question that had been circulating for months. Was Prince Harry's story one of survival, or one of resentment? Harry, now visibly more guarded, leaned into his defense. He spoke of control, or rather the lack of it, within the royal system. His claim was direct. His life, his image, and even his choices had been manipulated to serve an institution that valued continuity above individuality. In his view, breaking away was not rebellion but necessity, a matter of reclaiming agency over his own narrative. But Anderson was not satisfied with the framing alone. He pressed further, pointing to the criticisms Harry faced from the public and the media. If the goal was to move forward, why did so much of Harry's public life revolve around revisiting old grievances? Could constant criticism of the monarchy be interpreted as bitterness rather than truth-telling? The question cut sharply. Harry's reply was firm, almost dismissive. He argued that speaking out was not resentment but accountability. The press, he insisted, had twisted his motives, portraying him as entitled when, in his view, he was merely exposing the machinery of power that had silenced others before him. The word survival returned repeatedly in his answers, as though to anchor his story in necessity rather than anger. Still, Anderson pushed on the contradictions. He highlighted the tension between Harry's demand for privacy and his willingness to publish memoirs, sit for high-profile interviews, and appear on international television. Was this about healing, or about controlling the narrative? The exchange carried the cadence of a political debate, one man insisting on his right to speak, the other reminding him that public trust requires consistency. As the back-and-forth continued, the conversation took on a tone of confrontation. Harry's frustration showed as he dismissed critics as products of a hostile media environment. Anderson countered by noting that public figures, whether politicians or royals, are always subject to scrutiny, and that accountability does not disappear with titles. In those moments, the interview felt less like a celebrity profile and more like a congressional hearing. Harry stood defiant, refusing to concede ground, while Anderson held the line on public responsibility. What emerged was not consensus, but collision, a clash between personal grievance and public expectation, between individual survival and institutional accountability. By the time the segment drew to a close, the studio felt charged. Both men remained composed, but the tension was unmistakable. The conversation had moved beyond family and legacy. It had become a debate over credibility, motive, and the price of stepping outside the system. The conversation, by now, had shed any illusion of politeness. What began as calm reflection had transformed into a contest of wills. Anderson Cooper's questions had grown sharper, less about Harry's personal narrative and more about accountability to the public. The tension in the room was unmistakable. Two men, both skilled in their roles, locked in a battle over perception, truth, and power. Anderson put forward the question that many had been waiting to hear. Was Prince Harry trapped not by the monarchy, but by his own bitterness? He noted that to critics, Harry's repeated retelling of grievances appeared less like survival and more like entitlement, a refusal to let go. The words landed with weight, forcing a silence before Harry answered. Harry's reply carried defiance. He insisted he owed no apology, no explanation to those who had not lived his life. His argument was blunt. He had been silenced for too long, and if the cost of speaking out was public criticism, so be it. To him, survival and truth-telling were one and the same, even if they came across as anger. Anderson did not flinch. He countered with the language of accountability, reminding Harry that public figures cannot choose only sympathy, they must also accept scrutiny. He compared Harry's position to that of political leaders, individuals who may feel misunderstood but who cannot dismiss legitimate questions as mere hostility. This was not an attack. It was a reminder that credibility rests on consistency. The exchange grew heavier, verging on hostility. Harry bristled at the suggestion that his story was self-destructive, while Anderson pressed him to confront the possibility. At times, Harry leaned forward, voice rising, insisting that his critics misunderstood him entirely. Anderson, steady in tone, allowed the silence after each question to hang, forcing Harry to fill it with answers that grew sharper, more defensive. By this point, the interview no longer resembled a celebrity sit-down. It had the texture of a political cross-examination, one man defending his record, the other testing the strength of his arguments. Pride, pain, and principle were all colliding in real time, each answer pulling the conversation closer to rupture. The breaking point came not in a single outburst, but in the accumulation of tension. Every exchange had chipped away at civility until what remained was confrontation stripped of pretense. Anderson's composure held, Harry's defensiveness hardened, and the gulf between them widened. The interview did not end with resolution. It ended with conflict left unresolved, a portrait of two men unwilling to yield. For viewers, it was less about who won and more about what was revealed. A prince at war with perception, and a journalist unwilling to surrender the role of accountability. The calm had long since vanished. What remained was a battle of dignity, pride, and the heavy weight of legacy.